The day everything changed began just like any other. The sun streamed in through the wide windows of the Pierce family boardroom, casting a soft golden light across the polished oak table. My husband, Greg, sat beside me, looking calm and collected as always, even though I could tell he was a little more tense than usual. He had been worried about the latest partnership falling through, but he kept it under wraps, at least in front of me. The room was filled with the usual crowd. Thomas, my brother in law, always eager to criticize anything that wasn't his idea. Caroline, my sister in law, who smiled sweetly while always looking for a way to undermine me. And of course, Henry, Greg's father, the patriarch of the Pierce family. Henry had never liked me. He tolerated me because I was Greg's wife, but there was always a subtle disdain in his eyes. He'd often make comments about my humble beginnings, or the fact that I didn't come from old money like the Pierces. To him, I was just a stepping stone in his son's life, someone to hold the family together, but never truly one of them. Today, however, things felt different. I could sense an undercurrent of tension. It wasn't just the failed partnership we were supposed to be discussing, it was something else, something more personal. Vanessa, Henry said, his voice thick with authority. You're the one who handles the luxury properties, correct? I nodded, maintaining my calm. I'd been managing the Pierce family's investments in high-end real estate for over 5 years now. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something I excelled at. Yes, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I've been overseeing the portfolio and working on expanding our international holdings. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as if he were ready to pounce. Funny, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, because the numbers I'm seeing don't exactly line up with what you've been telling us. I felt a cold knot twist in my stomach. My mind raced, trying to piece together what he was implying. What do you mean? He flipped open a folder, sliding it across the table toward me. The papers inside were detailed financial projections, but they weren't from our accountants. They were altered. I could tell at a glance. Someone had been tampering with the numbers. My pulse quickened. Looks like the expansion in Europe isn't doing as well as you claimed, Thomas continued, a smug grin spreading across his face. In fact, these figures indicate a significant loss. Care to explain why our investments are tanking on your watch? I glanced at Greg, who had gone pale. His hand tightened around his pen, but he didn't speak. I was alone in this. The whole room was waiting for me to respond, and I could feel the weight of their gazes pressing down on me. I reached for the folder, my fingers trembling slightly, but I refused to let it show. As I scanned the numbers, I knew they didn't make sense. This wasn't something I had overlooked. This wasn't something I had caused. Someone had planted false data to sabotage the project, and I could feel my blood boiling. Thomas, these figures aren't correct, I said, trying to maintain my composure. There's been a mistake. Oh, really? Caroline chimed in from the other side of the table, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Maybe you're just not cut out for the job. I mean, let's face it, Vanessa, you've never really fit in with this family, have you? It's always been a little obvious that you're just here because of Greg. The room went silent for a moment, and I felt my heart race in my chest. Caroline had always been a thorn in my side, but I had never expected her to attack me so openly. Greg looked at her, his eyes wide, but didn't speak. I felt a pang of disappointment. Why didn't he defend me? I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. I've worked here for years. I'm dedicated to this business, and I've done everything to ensure its success. You know that, I said, my voice quieter, more controlled. Do we? Henry asked, his voice cutting through the tension. His eyes were cold, almost calculating. I think it's time we reevaluate your role here, Vanessa. If you're not able to manage things properly, maybe we should find someone who can. I blinked, feeling the ground beneath me start to shake. Was this really happening? Did they honestly think I was incapable? Before I could respond, Caroline smirked. It's always a bit of a gamble, isn't it? Marrying into the family business, but not really being one of us. Maybe you've outstayed your welcome, Vanessa. I looked at Greg, hoping he'd say something, anything. But he didn't. He just stared at the table, avoiding my gaze as if he were pretending this wasn't happening. Henry's voice cut through the tension again. I think we need to take action. Vanessa, I'm afraid you're no longer needed in your current role. You're relieved of your duties effective immediately. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, everything around me went silent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Fired. In front of everyone. All of them were watching me, waiting for me to protest, to beg for my job. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was too stunned, too angry. I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. You can't do this, I said, but my voice was barely a whisper, as if I couldn't quite believe the words I was saying. Oh, I can, Henry replied with an icy calm. It's my company. You're not indispensable, Vanessa. Caroline smiled, her lips curling into a satisfied smirk, and Thomas leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, like a spectator at a show. The whole room had turned against me, and Greg, my husband, said nothing. I walked out of that boardroom with my head held high, my heart pounding in my chest. The doors slammed shut behind me, and I felt the weight of my world crashing down. But what I didn't know then, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't the helpless woman they thought I was. I wasn't just Greg's wife. I wasn't just the woman they could push around. I had a power they couldn't see. And soon, they'd learn the hard way just how much they had underestimated me. The game was just beginning. I sat in the sleek, modern car as it glided through the streets of the city that felt colder to me now. The familiar landmarks passed by, but everything seemed distant, like I was watching it all through a fogged up window. The last few hours had been a blur, one shocking, humiliating moment after another. My hands still shook as I gripped my phone, scrolling through the messages I'd received. None of them mattered now. Greg had texted me, apologizing. I hadn't responded. I didn't know what I could say anymore. He hadn't even stood up for me when they fired me. Not once had he uttered a word in my defense. And what about his family? My so-called family-in-law, who had treated me like an outsider for years. Today, they finally exposed just how much they never saw me as part of the Pierce legacy. I was nothing more than an accessory to them, someone to tolerate as long as I didn't upset the fragile balance they'd worked so hard to maintain. I blinked back tears, but I wouldn't let them fall. Not now. Not when I had no time to indulge in weakness. The car turned onto a secluded street where I had arranged for my retreat. No one from the Pierce family knew about this place. It wasn't far from the chaos of the city, but it felt like a different world. The moment I stepped into the penthouse, I knew it was time to change the game. I walked through the door, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The spacious, minimalist interior greeted me with its cool elegance, everything meticulously designed for maximum impact. I had bought this place a year ago, not for a vacation home, but for moments exactly like this. I needed a place where I could think clearly, where no one could judge me or question my worth. Here, I was in control. I went to my desk, pulling open the drawer where I kept my laptop, and turned it on. My fingers danced over the keyboard, quickly pulling up financial reports and market analysis. The Pierce family business, the one I had been so dutifully trying to save, was in shambles. The board was unstable, and there was a growing rift between Caroline and Thomas. Even Greg was beginning to question his place in the family after today's spectacle. It was clear that the once unshakable foundation of the Pierce empire, but I was starting to see the bigger picture. If they wanted to tear me down, I'd have to rebuild. And I'd rebuild stronger than before. My hand hovered over the mouse. The files were all there: market trends, investment forecasts, business models. The Pierce family had been running on outdated practices for years, and I had the means to fix everything. I wasn't just Greg's wife, and I wasn't just someone who lived in their shadow. I was the one who had quietly taken my fortune and built it. I had set up a network of investments, some of which were small stakes in up-and-coming tech companies. Some of them were holdings in multinational corporations that were worth billions now. I was the quiet one, the one they never bothered to consider as a threat. But I wasn't just going to sit by anymore. I was going to take what was mine. My phone buzzed. I checked the message, but it wasn't Greg. It was a reminder from one of my financial advisors. The merger I'd been planning for months was ready to go live. If I moved fast enough, I could position myself as the key stakeholder in the Pierce family's most important investments. And I could push Caroline and Thomas out of the picture once and for all. I smiled to myself. It was time to act. I spent the next few hours getting everything in place. I contacted my team, my lawyers, my financial analysts, and the few trusted people who had helped me build this empire without anyone noticing. I wasn't just going to let Caroline laugh at me again, or let Thomas claim that I wasn't cut out for this. I was about to show them how very wrong they were. By the time night fell, I was already deep in planning. I was coordinating the purchase of stock in several of the Pierce family's most vulnerable assets. A few well timed acquisitions would give me control of their failing ventures. I'd let them think they were winning, even as I pulled the strings. Let them believe they were in charge, while they had no idea what was about to happen. But just before I signed the final papers for the merger, I hesitated. Something didn't feel right. My finger hovered above the mouse, and I felt a pang of guilt, something I hadn't expected. I thought about Greg again, the man I had married. I had always known our marriage wasn't perfect, but today, he had shown me who he really was. He hadn't just stayed silent. He'd been complicit. He had let them destroy me without lifting a finger. I closed my eyes for a moment. This wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about everything I had sacrificed for this family. It was about the dreams I had put on hold and the life I had let slip away in pursuit of something I thought was worth it. But I couldn't let that stop me. Not now. I finalized the merger documents and watched as my shares in the Pierce family's holdings began to grow. In the next few weeks, the foundation I'd just laid would send ripples through the company. Caroline and Thomas wouldn't even see it coming. They'd fight back, sure, but I had the upper hand now. When the morning light broke through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my blouse, ready for a new day, a new phase. I would no longer be the woman they walked all over. I would no longer be the quiet, dutiful wife. I was going to make them see me, really see me. And when they did, they'd regret every moment they spent trying to tear me down. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. It was time to move ahead with the next phase of my plan, making sure the Pierce family business was mine for the taking. I was no longer the woman who sat quietly in the background, waiting for others to define her. As the days passed, I felt a shift within myself, like I was waking up from a long, uncomfortable dream. I'd spent so many years playing the dutiful wife, the obedient daughter-in-law, pretending to be content with a life that was anything but. Today, I was someone else. I was the woman who held the power, the one who was going to take control of her own destiny. The first step in my plan was simple: go public. My connection to the Pierce family had always been a shadow, known but never acknowledged. But now, I would show them how wrong they were about me, how I had always been far more than what they saw. I started with the gala. It was one of the most prestigious events of the year, drawing some of the most influential business people, tech moguls, and investors from around the world. The Pierce family attended every year, treating it as their personal social gathering, a chance to rub elbows with the elite and maintain their status. I had never gone before. I didn't need to. I was always in the background, managing the properties, ensuring everything ran smoothly without the need for fanfare. But this year would be different. I didn't tell Greg I was going. I wasn't going to be his accessory anymore, his invisible wife who showed up at the family functions only when it was convenient. This time, I was going to stand on my own, surrounded by people who respected me, not because I was married to him, but because of what I had built myself. The night of the gala, I stood before the full-length mirror in my penthouse, adjusting the sleek black dress that hugged every curve of my body. It was understated, elegant, a far cry from the ornate gowns my in-laws would wear, designed to draw attention. I didn't need to draw attention. I only needed to make an impact. I slipped on the pair of heels I'd picked out specifically for the occasion, tall, but not too tall. They made me feel powerful. As I stepped into the car, I felt a rush of excitement, but also an undercurrent of nervousness. It had been years since I'd put myself first, and it was a strange feeling, empowering but unfamiliar. I wasn't just Vanessa. the woman who is overlooked and underappreciated. Tonight, I would be Vanessa, the woman who owned her worth. The gala was held in one of the grandest hotels in the city. As I entered, the lights glittered above me like a constellation of stars, and the hum of conversation filled the air. There were dozens of familiar faces, most of whom I'd met over the years, but never had the chance to really talk to. Tonight, I wasn't just a background figure. I was here to be seen. I moved through the crowd, smiling politely at those who greeted me. There were some introductions I didn't bother with, preferring instead to keep my distance from the people who had been part of the same social circle as my in laws. I wasn't here to make small talk. I was here to make an impression. As the night wore on, I could feel eyes on me. I wasn't used to being the center of attention, at least not in this way. But it was different now. I wasn't hiding anymore. I moved with purpose, exuding confidence in every step. The guests I spoke with were impressed by my knowledge of the industry, by my insight into business trends, and by my easy ability to discuss complex topics with ease. I wasn't just Greg's wife. I wasn't just the woman who had quietly supported the family business from behind the scenes. I was someone who could stand shoulder to shoulder with the most influential people in the room. And that was when I saw him. His name was Lucas Bennett, a tech mogul whose company was poised to disrupt the entire industry. He was tall, with an easy charm and a sharp wit that immediately drew people in. He had a reputation for being fiercely intelligent and somewhat elusive, always playing his cards close to his chest. But when he looked at me, I saw something in his eyes that made me feel seen. "Vanessa," he said, stepping toward me with a knowing smile. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight." "I'm full of surprises," I replied with a playful smile. "I can see that," he said, clearly intrigued. "It's not often I meet someone with such a sharp mind in this crowd. Most people are too busy talking about their latest investments to actually understand what they're investing in." I felt a flicker of satisfaction. He wasn't just complimenting me on my appearance, he was complimenting my intellect. It felt like a revelation. For the first time in years, I realized that I wasn't just a wife or a daughter-in-law or a token woman in a family business.
Spent the rest
I
of
was
the
a
evening
force
talking
in my
about
own
business.
business, technology, and the future of innovation. Lucas seemed genuinely impressed by my ideas, and by the time the night was winding down, I had secured an introduction to some of the most influential people in the tech world. It felt exhilarating. But there was more to this than just networking. This was about making my mark, proving that I wasn't just a passive observer in the world I'd been thrust into. I had the power to shape things, to control my own future, and I wasn't going to let anyone forget that. When the evening came to an end, I felt a sense of accomplishment. I had done more than just attend a gala. I had made connections, built rapport, and made sure people knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of. As I walked back to the car, I felt the familiar weight of my life with the Pierces, their expectations, their judgments, begin to loosen. The next day, I received an email from Lucas Bennett's team. He wanted to set up a meeting to discuss a potential partnership. I smiled as I read the message. This was just the beginning. But there was one more thing I had to do. It was time to start building my stake in the Pierce family business, and I wasn't going to do it quietly. I had already begun to make some strategic investments, moving fast to buy up shares in key assets that the family owned. Caroline had been careless, making risky moves in her quest to take over parts of the company. But now, I could use her overconfidence against her. I opened my laptop, and with a few swift movements, I started putting my plan into action. The Pierce family had no idea what was coming. But soon, they'd learn that I was not the woman they thought I was. I was the one they had underestimated. And it was time to show them exactly what I could do. The weeks that followed the gala were a whirlwind. My life had shifted so rapidly, I barely had time to catch my breath. The connections I'd made that night with Lucas Bennett and his colleagues in the tech world were paying off faster than I could have imagined. I'd already signed the paperwork to acquire a sizable stake in some of the most promising startups in the industry. Each day, my portfolio grew stronger, and with it, my confidence. I had also started making waves within the Pierce family business, although none of them realized it yet. I'd quietly begun to invest in several of the family's assets, stocks that were undervalued, properties they had neglected, and tech ventures that Caroline and Thomas had been too busy squabbling over to properly manage. They thought they were still in control. They were wrong. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about proving to myself that I wasn't just the wife of a Pierce. I wasn't just the woman who had been married off into this family for appearances. I was a force in my own right, and I was going to make sure they knew it. It was a Tuesday morning when the first sign of the coming storm appeared. I was sitting in my office going through reports when my phone buzzed. It was from Greg. "We need to talk. Can you meet me at the office later?" I hadn't spoken to him much since the gala. He'd called a few times, leaving messages filled with apologies and guilt. I hadn't responded. I couldn't bring myself to. Every time I heard his voice, it was a reminder of the betrayal I'd felt when he'd stayed silent during that meeting. I had been humiliated, and he hadn't done a thing to stop it. Still, this was business. And despite everything, the fact remained that he was my husband. The Pierce family business was still very much his, and by extension, mine. If I was going to take what was rightfully mine, I needed to play this carefully. I arrived at the office shortly after lunch. The building had the same sterile, cold feeling as always. The same polished floors, the same dark wood paneling. I didn't belong here, not anymore. But I was going to make sure they never forgot that I had the power to bring this place down if I chose to. Greg was waiting for me in one of the glass-walled conference rooms. He looked tired, worn out, even. His hair was a little disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of pity, but then I remembered everything that had happened, the way he had allowed his family to treat me. That pity faded quickly. "Vanessa," he said quietly, standing as I entered the room. "I've been trying to reach you. I've been busy," I replied coolly, walking past him to take a seat at the table. He sat down across from me, his gaze falling to the table as if he didn't know how to start. I was done with pleasantries, though. It was clear to me now that Greg had always been a man of convenience. When it suited him, I was by his side, but when things got difficult, he turned away. He had never truly fought for me, not once. "I know I messed up," Greg said, looking up at me finally. His eyes were filled with guilt, but I couldn't let that sway me. "But I've been talking to my dad and Thomas, and they're willing to reconsider the decision. If you want, we can work something out." I raised an eyebrow. "Reconsider? You mean they're willing to take me back?" "Not exactly," he said, hesitating. "They want to reassign you to a different role, one that's more in line with your skills. They think it would be better if you focused on a different part of the business, something less high profile." I stared at him, speechless for a moment. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. "So, they're offering me a consolation prize?" Greg's eyes darkened, but he didn't answer right away. "It's a chance to prove yourself again," he said finally. "You just need to show them that you can handle something smaller, less risky. If you do well, they'll give you more responsibility." I could feel my blood boiling beneath the surface. They thought I'd fall for this? They thought I'd be satisfied with being relegated to some back office, hidden away where no one could see me? The same family that had humiliated me, stripped away my position, and thought I'd simply fall back in line? "I don't need your family's charity," I said, my voice icy. "And I'm certainly not going to waste my time with their second-rate assignments. I've worked too hard to get where I am." Greg shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair. "Vanessa, please. I'm asking you to think about this. I don't want to lose you." For a moment, I almost felt like I might cave. The sincerity in his voice, the desperation, it almost made me want to soften. But then I remembered everything that had happened. The silence, the betrayal. I couldn't forgive him. Not this easily. "You're not losing me, Greg," I said, standing up and gathering my things. "But you're losing your company and your family because I'm done playing by their rules. I'm taking what's mine." His face paled as I walked toward the door, but I didn't look back. There was nothing left to say. The truth was, I had already made my decision. My stake in the Pierce family's business was growing, and I wasn't about to let it go. I'd quietly positioned myself to take control of the assets that had been neglected, ones that the family thought were worth little more than a footnote in their sprawling empire. As I walked out of the office, a sense of calm washed over me. I could feel the weight of my decision settling in, but this time it wasn't a burden. It was freedom. I wasn't going to play their games anymore. I wasn't going to be the forgotten wife or the second class daughter in law. They'd pushed me out. Now I would take everything they had built and make it mine. The Pierce family had made their move. Now it was my turn. The days that followed my confrontation with Greg were some of the most chaotic, yet oddly liberating, of my life. I was no longer burdened by the expectations of the Pierce family. I had made my decision, and now the wheels were in motion. There was no turning back. I spent my mornings in the office, working closely with my legal and financial teams to position myself as the primary stakeholder in the Pierce family business. They had no idea what was coming, and I intended to keep it that way for as long as possible. The next step in my plan was to gain control of the board. Caroline had been running the show lately, but I knew her arrogance would be her downfall. She thought she could push me around, belittle me, but she didn't realize how close I had been watching her and how much I had majority of shares in several key assets. The board's composition was already changing. The merger I had initiated with Lucas Bennett's tech company was gaining traction, and it was about to become a game changer. The Pierce family would be forced to deal with me on my terms, not theirs. They thought they could sideline me, reduce my role to that of a passive observer. But in reality, I had already positioned myself as an irreplaceable part of their future. I had kept Greg in the dark for as long as possible, but now I needed him. Not for emotional support or to make decisions for me, but as a pawn in the bigger game. He was still a Pierce, and his name carried weight. It was time to remind him of that. Greg, I said one afternoon when I called him to meet me at one of our properties, one of the ones I'd been quietly acquiring from under the family's nose. I need you to come to the office with me. There's something I need to discuss. He didn't question me. Maybe it was because he sensed the shift in me, the way I no longer cared about keeping up appearances. Maybe it was because he still didn't realize just how much I had already outpaced him. Whatever it was, he arrived at the office within an hour, looking as tense as I had ever seen him. The once cocky man who thought he could fix everything with a few well-placed words was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood that the game had changed. I had invited him to the conference room, the one that overlooked the city, the same room where we had talked about our dreams, our future. Now it felt like a battlefield. The glass walls were pristine, offering a clear view of the world outside, but the city felt miles away. Vanessa, what is this about? Greg asked, his voice tight. He wasn't used to me taking charge. He had always been the one making the calls, assuming the role of the protector, the decision maker. But that was the past. I turned to face him, allowing the silence to stretch between us for a few moments. He looked different, smaller somehow. Not physically, but in the way he carried himself. He no longer had the air of someone who controlled everything, who had the world at his feet. He was realizing, too late, that I had been the one holding it all together from the beginning. I've been working on something, I said finally. Something that will change everything for you, for the family, for the company. Greg frowned, his brow furrowing as he took a step forward. What are you talking about? Is this about the merger with Bennett? I told you, we've already decided. I don't care about your family's decisions, Greg, I interrupted, my voice colder than I intended. You don't get to tell me what I can or can't do anymore. I've been quietly working behind the scenes to acquire key shares in the company, to make sure that the future is mine to control. And now you need to help me secure it. He stared at me, clearly struggling to process the words I had just said. The silence in the room was thick. Finally, he spoke, his voice more subdued than before. You're saying you've been taking control of the company? I nodded slowly, watching his face change from confusion to disbelief to something resembling fear. Yes. And now I need you to convince your family to vote in my favor at the next board meeting. His jaw tightened, his eyes flickering with panic. Vanessa, this is insane. You can't just walk in and take over. It's not that simple. I already have the majority of shares, Greg, I said calmly, cutting him off. It is that simple. The next step is for me to take my place at the head of the table. I need the board on my side, and that's where you come in. I need your name, your influence, to make sure they understand that I'm the future of this company. Without me, they'll lose everything." His lips parted as if he wanted to argue, but no words came out. I could see the wheels turning in his head, the realization dawning on him. He hadn't seen it before, hadn't realized that I'd been playing this game with a quiet intensity that was impossible to ignore now. I wasn't just his wife anymore. I was a power player in my own right. "I don't want to do this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't care what you want." I snapped back, the words sharper than I had intended. "I didn't ask you for your opinion. I asked for your help. And whether you like it or not, this is the only way forward for all of us." Greg stood there for a long moment, struggling with himself. I could tell he was torn. He had always been loyal to his family, but now he had to make a choice. And the choice was clear: stick with the family that had pushed me aside, or help me take control and build something better. Finally, he sighed and rubbed his hand over his face. "What do you need me to do?" I smiled, a sense of triumph filling me. "I need you to convince your father, Caroline, and Thomas to back me when the vote comes. You need to make them understand that I'm the one who can take this company into the future. I'm the one who knows how to navigate the shifting market. I'm the one who can save it." He hesitated, but then nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do it. But don't think this is going to be easy. You've made enemies of all of them." "I've made my peace with that," I replied, standing up. "It's time to remind them who the real power in this family is." As Greg left the office, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted irrevocably. This wasn't just a business deal anymore, it was personal. I was no longer fighting for a seat at the table. I was going to take the whole damn thing. The next few days were filled with tense meetings, phone calls, and late night strategizing. The board was scheduled to meet in a week, and by then, everything would be in place. I had one shot at this, and I wasn't about to let it slip through my fingers. The Pierce family had underestimated me for far too long. It was time for them to learn the hard way that underestimating Vanessa Pierce, myself, had been their biggest mistake yet. The board meeting was only days away, but I could already feel the tension rising. I had done everything I could to prepare, aligning the key players in my favor, securing enough votes to ensure that I would take control of the company. But even with all the groundwork in place, the real battle was about to begin. The night before the meeting, I sat alone in my penthouse, going over the final details. My phone buzzed. It was Greg again. "Vanessa, we need to talk. Are you sure about this? It's not too late to reconsider." I didn't hesitate. I typed out a quick reply. "There's no turning back now." He knew that. I had made my decision, and there was no changing it. I had spent the last few days strategizing, playing my part as the calm, collected businesswoman, while Greg had been scrambling, trying to talk sense into his family. He kept me updated with every call, every meeting. But the truth was, I was already ahead of him. I knew how this game worked. I had learned it over the years, watching how they moved and acted, how they thought they could control me. They didn't understand how much I had been watching, learning, waiting for this moment. At the meeting tomorrow, I would stand in front of the entire board and I would take my seat at the table. Caroline and Thomas wouldn't be able to hide behind their arrogance anymore. I had taken control of the assets they had neglected, and soon I would take control of the company itself. But as much as I tried to focus on the business side of things, there was a nagging feeling deep inside me, something I couldn't shake. The Pierce family had always been a thorn in my side, but Greg had been the one person I had tried to protect, the one person I had hoped would stand by me. But I wasn't sure anymore. His repeated attempts to convince me to back down, his reluctance to fully support me, left me wondering if I could really trust him. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Lucas Bennett. "I'm thinking we should speed things up with the merger." Lucas was exactly what I needed. He wasn't just a powerful businessman. He was also someone who understood the game. He didn't need to be told twice. He knew how to read the room and make the right moves at the right time. If things went according to plan, the merger would not only secure my position in the company, it would put me in a position to dominate the market in ways the Pierces could never have imagined. But first, I had to survive tomorrow. I spent the rest of the night in a haze, my thoughts swirling around every possible outcome. There was no room for doubt now. I had fought for this moment, and I wasn't about to let anything or anyone derail my plans. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, walking into the sleek glass building that had been the Pierce family's kingdom for so long. The cold marble floors beneath my feet felt like a reminder of how little it had ever meant to me. I had never been one to care about wealth or status, not like they did. To them, power was a game. To me, it was survival. I walked past the security desk, offering a polite nod, though I could feel the eyes of the staff on me. They didn't know it yet, but things were about to change for everyone. The Pierce family had built an empire, yes, but it had been crumbling from the inside, their arrogance and greed threatening to tear it all down. And I was the one who was going to rebuild it. By the time I reached the boardroom, the tension in the air was palpable. The room was filled with the usual suspects: Caroline, Thomas, Greg's father, and the other senior members of the company. They all looked at me as I entered, some with confusion, others with disdain. Caroline's smile was tight. The corners of her lips curled in a way that made it clear she thought I was out of my league. Thomas didn't even bother to hide the contempt in his gaze. But I didn't flinch. I walked to my seat at the table, sitting down with purpose. The silence hung heavy for a few moments before Greg's father cleared his throat. "Vanessa," he began, his voice low but firm, "I trust you understand the importance of this meeting. We've been discussing the direction of the company, and we've made it clear where we stand." Caroline's eyes gleamed with her usual arrogance, and I could feel the challenge in the air. But I wasn't here to back down. I wasn't here to be treated like the outsider, the second class wife they had always dismissed. I was here to show them who I had become and who they had failed to see. "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But the truth is, none of you have truly understood what this company needs. You've allowed it to stagnate, clinging to outdated models, ignoring the opportunities right in front of you. I'm not here to make suggestions. I'm here to take action." Greg shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting around the room. He had always been good at playing the middle, trying to please both sides. But today, there was no middle ground. Today, he had to choose a side, and it wouldn't be mine if he didn't step up. I continued, my gaze focused on the rest of the room. "I've taken the liberty of securing majority shares in some key assets that are critical to the company's future. The direction we've been going in is no longer sustainable. If you want to stay relevant in this market, it's time to embrace change. And I'm the change you need." I could see Caroline's jaw tighten, but she said nothing. Instead, she motioned for the vote to begin. It was clear she thought this was just another negotiation, another bluff. But she was wrong. Greg stood up, visibly shaking his head as he looked at me. His voice, when he spoke, was strained. "Vanessa, you can't just take control like this. This is madness." I raised an eyebrow, my voice cold. "You're right, Greg. This isn't just control. This is my future." The room went silent, but I could see the shift in the way the others were looking at me. It was happening. Slowly but surely, they were beginning to realize I wasn't just a passive participant anymore. I wasn't just a woman behind the scenes. I was the woman with the power to change everything. The vote was cast, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears as the tally was read. The results were exactly as I had expected. The board, though hesitant, had no choice but to back me. They knew who held the reins now. I stood up slowly, the weight of my victory settling in. Greg stood motionless, his eyes wide with disbelief. Caroline shot me one final, venomous look before turning away. "I believe we have a new direction for the company," I said, my voice steady and sure. "And it's one that no one at this table is going to stop." The game had changed, and I was the one holding all the cards. The board meeting was over, and my victory had been secured, but the aftermath was just beginning. As I walked out of the room, I could hear the murmurs of disbelief from the members who had just voted me into power. I had expected resistance, but what I hadn't anticipated was the shock and betrayal in Greg's eyes. He hadn't spoken a word since the vote was cast, and I could feel the weight of his silence pressing down on me. I didn't let it affect me. The hard part was over. The rest was just a matter of ensuring that everyone understood who was truly in control. That night, as I sat alone in my office, reviewing the minutes of the meeting, I couldn't help but feel a sense of calm wash over me. It was as though everything that had led up to this moment, the years of humiliation, the quiet planning, the patience I had shown, had all come to fruition. I had done it. I had taken control of the company, and no one could take that from me. But as I leaned back in my chair, a wave of uncertainty hit me. What was next? The family would never just let me walk away with everything. Caroline and Thomas were already plotting their next move. I was sure of it. The question wasn't whether they would try to take me down, but how they would do it. I was interrupted by a knock on my office door. "Come in," I called, sitting up straighter. It was Greg. His face was drawn, and his eyes were hard. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, but didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, his arms crossed, staring at me. "I hope you're happy," he finally said, his voice cold. I met his gaze, my heart steady, but my mind racing. "I am. I've worked for this moment, Greg. You know that." "You didn't have to do this," he said, the bitterness in his tone sharp. "You could have worked with us, made it easier. You didn't have to go behind our backs, manipulating everything to make sure you'd win. You could have." "Could have what?" I interrupted, standing up from my desk. "Let you all walk all over me? Let you continue to undermine me, to reduce me to nothing but a piece of property in your precious family's empire? No, Greg. I didn't have a choice. You didn't give me one." His jaw tightened, and he turned away, pacing the length of the room before turning back to face me. "You don't get it, do you? You've destroyed everything. My family won't forgive this. They won't let this go. You think you can just waltz in and take over, but they'll fight you for it. They'll fight you to the bitter end." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I had known this would happen. I had known Greg wouldn't take this well. But the reality was that I couldn't afford to back down now. "I didn't destroy anything, Greg," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Your family destroyed itself. I just pointed out what was already broken and fixed it. The company was falling apart, and you were too busy playing politics to see it. Now I'm going to rebuild it. I'm going to make it better. And you either help me or you stand in my way."
Face
But
twisted in
I'm not
frustration.
backing down. "You think I'm just going to sit here and let you take everything from me? I'm not taking anything from you," I replied, my voice steady. "If you want to be part of this, I'll welcome you. If you want to keep fighting me, then that's on you. But I'm not the one who started this war, Greg. You and your family did." He glared at me for a long moment, his hands balling into fists. Then, finally, he sighed and shook his head. "I don't know what's happened to you. You used to be different. You used to care." "I care more than you know," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. "But I've learned that sometimes you have to fight for what you deserve. No one was going to hand this to me. I had to take it. And if you want to stay in this fight with me, then I'm willing to help you. But don't expect me to feel sorry for you." There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought he might say something more. But then he just turned and left, the door closing behind him with a soft click. I didn't let it faze me. I had known he would never be the same after today. I had known it from the moment he stood silently by when his family shamed me. But it didn't matter. Not anymore. Over the next few days, I settled into my new role. The transition wasn't easy. Caroline and Thomas wasted no time, making it clear they weren't happy with the way things had played out. They were still trying to find ways to regain control, undermining my decisions at every turn. But I was prepared. I knew their tactics. They were predictable, arrogant. They thought they could intimidate me, but they didn't realize how much I had learned in the years I'd spent on the sidelines. Lucas Bennett was invaluable during this time. He had become not just a business partner, but an ally in every sense of the word. His influence in the tech world gave us the edge we needed. We were already in discussions to expand into several new markets, and the Pierce family's outdated business model was about to be left behind. At the same time, I began quietly removing some of the people who had been loyal to Caroline and Thomas from key positions. I didn't make it obvious, but within a week, The balance of power had shifted in my favor. I was no longer just a figurehead. I was the driving force behind the company's future, and I wasn't going to let anyone forget it. Then one afternoon, I received a call from the Pierce family lawyer. "Miss Pierce," he said, his tone formal, "I've been asked to inform you that the family is prepared to offer a settlement. They want to avoid any further legal battles. They're willing to buy you out." I almost laughed. I had expected this. They were trying to buy me off, trying to get me to back down. But they didn't understand. "I'm not interested in a settlement," I said, my voice cold. "I'm not leaving. I'm not going anywhere." The lawyer hesitated before speaking again. "Very well, but I must warn you, they will not back down easily." "Neither will I said, and hung up the phone. The Pierce family was underestimating me once again. They thought they could buy me out, force me to sell my stake, and walk away with their pride intact. But I wasn't going anywhere. Not until I had everything I wanted. And this time, I wasn't asking for permission. I was taking what was mine. The war was far from over. But now it was on my terms. The next few days felt like a whirlwind, and it became clear to me that the battle I thought I had won was only just beginning. The Pierce family, like cornered animals, were lashing out in every direction, trying to claw back control, and their efforts were relentless. But I wasn't fazed. I had been prepared for this. In fact, I had expected it. After my conversation with the family lawyer, I knew their attempt to buy me off was just the first of many failed tactics. But I didn't expect the next move. I had been too focused on the business side of things to notice the growing rift in my marriage until it was staring me in the face. It started with a simple text from Greg just a few days after the board meeting. "We need to talk. It's about us." At first, I thought it was just more of the same, more of his attempts to guilt me into backing down, to remind me of the vows we'd made and how our marriage was falling apart because of the choices I'd made. But there was something different in his tone, something colder, more distant. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I put the phone down and walked to the large windows in my office, looking out over the city. The skyline seemed to stretch on forever, just like the future I had in mind for myself. The Pierce family might have built their empire on the backs of other people, on lies and manipulation, but I was going to rebuild it from the ground up. I was going to do it on my terms. I had made it clear to Greg when we married that my ambitions weren't negotiable. I'd never been the type to sit in the background, to play the dutiful wife. But over the years, I had tried. For him, I'd tried to make compromises, to play the part. And yet, every time I'd given a little, he took more. He wanted me to be a part of his world, but only on his terms. He wanted me to blend in, to stay quiet, to submit. And in the end, that's exactly what had happened until now. The text from Greg wasn't just a request for conversation. It was the beginning of the end for us. And I knew it. Finally, I replied, "Come to the office." He showed up an hour later, as expected. His face was taut, his jaw clenched, and his eyes, for the first time in weeks, were filled with something I couldn't place. Fear? Anger? Regret? Maybe all three. "Vanessa," he said, his voice low, "you're making a mistake. You don't understand what you've done." I folded my arms across my chest, standing tall in front of him. "Oh, I understand perfectly, Greg. This isn't a mistake. You've been too busy protecting your family's legacy to see it, but I'm not like you. I'm not here to follow orders or keep my mouth shut." His face reddened, and for a moment, I thought he might lash out. Instead, he shook his head, almost as if in disbelief. "Do you really think this is about them? About your so-called revenge? This is about us, Vanessa. About what we had. You're throwing everything away for power?" I took a step closer to him, my voice steady but cutting. "I'm not throwing anything away, Greg. I'm finally taking what's mine. I've been sitting on the sidelines long enough. But I'm not going to apologize for doing what I had to do to survive. You can't keep me in your little box, pretending that nothing's wrong, while everyone else gets everything they want. Not anymore." He looked pained, and I saw the flicker of guilt in his eyes. Maybe he had finally realized the truth. Maybe he'd finally understood how much I had given up for him and his family. But I couldn't afford to feel sorry for him. Not anymore. I don't know who you are anymore, he whispered, as though to himself. This isn't the woman I married. I almost laughed. The woman you married? The woman you've always tried to change into someone she's not? That's not me, Greg. That never was me. He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. You don't get it, do you? I said, my voice rising slightly. This isn't about power or revenge. It's about freedom. It's about finally taking control of my life. I'm done being the wife who gets dismissed at family dinners. I'm done being the one who's told what to do and when to do it. I'm taking my future into my own hands. You can either accept that or we can end this right now. The silence between us felt suffocating. He looked at me and I saw the battle waging inside him. He didn't want to lose me, but he didn't want to lose his family's approval either. I knew what he was going to say before he even opened his mouth. I don't think I can do this anymore, he said quietly. The words hit me harder than I'd expected. My heart clenched, and for a moment, the room seemed to tilt. But I didn't show it. Time for us to let go. I couldn't afford to. I said, the words as final as they felt. You've always been loyal to your family, Greg. I get it. I don't need your approval anymore. But I'm not going to stop. You either walk with me or you walk away. He swallowed hard, but didn't answer. His eyes flicked to the door, then back to me. And then, with a final glance, he turned and walked out of the office without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, and I was left standing there alone, the weight of the moment settling over me. There was no going back now. Greg had chosen his family over me, and I had chosen myself. It wasn't just a decision for the company, it was a decision for my life. I walked over to the desk, grabbing my phone. I had no time to waste on heartache. I still had a war to win, and the rest of the family wouldn't back down without a fight. Caroline, especially, was already plotting her next move. I called Lucas. We're moving ahead with the merger, I said as soon as he picked up. I need to make sure everything is set for the launch in the next few weeks. The Pierce family will try to throw me off track, but we're not going to let that happen. Lucas didn't hesitate. Got it. Let's make sure we're ready for whatever they throw at us. I hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, staring out of the window again. The city below seemed so small now, so insignificant compared to the future I was building. Greg had made his choice. The family had made theirs. And now it was my turn to show them just how wrong they were. This was only the beginning. And I wasn't going to let anyone, not even Greg, stop me. The following weeks felt like an endless game of chess, but this time, I was the one in control of the board. The family continued to circle, trying to regain a foothold, but they had no idea what I had planned. Every move they made seemed like a desperate attempt to salvage what was slipping through their fingers, but they couldn't see that the game was already over. I had won. At the center of it all, the company's restructuring was progressing smoothly. The merger with Lucas Bennett's firm was finalized, and we were moving into new territories, markets where the Pierce family had no foothold, no influence. Every deal I closed, every partnership I secured, was a step closer to solidifying my power. But, of course, the Pierces weren't going to let me take everything without a fight. Greg had been silent for days, and though I hadn't expected him to fight for me, I had hoped that he might at least step up and fight with me for the future of the company. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that he had already made his decision. His silence was his answer. He had chosen his family, and in doing so, he had chosen to walk away from me and from everything we had built together. The betrayal stung, but I didn't allow myself to feel sorry for him. Not anymore. He had shown me exactly who he was when he let his family manipulate and undermine me for so long. I had given him every chance to prove that he was on my side. But now it was too late. Caroline was still playing her games, trying to undermine me at every turn. I could almost feel her presence hovering in the background, like a shadow I couldn't shake. But no matter how many times she tried to throw a wrench in my plans, I was always one step ahead. She had no idea how badly I had studied every inch of her weaknesses, her insecurities. She thought she could use her charm and family name to intimidate me, but she didn't know how little I cared about either of those things. It wasn't just Caroline. Thomas, too, was making moves behind the scenes, trying to rally support from the board members who had been loyal to his family. But it was all futile. The tide had turned, and they couldn't stop it now. They didn't understand the lengths I was willing to go to, the sacrifices I had made to get here. They underestimated my resolve, my determination. They had written me off as nothing more than a trophy wife, but now they were about to realize how wrong they were. It was late one evening when I received an unexpected phone call. It was from Thomas's assistant. Miss Pierce, Thomas, is requesting a private meeting. He wants to discuss the future of the company. I knew what that meant. He was trying to make one last desperate attempt to keep control, to sway me back into the fold of the family. But I wasn't foolish enough to fall for his charm. I didn't need their approval anymore. Still, I agreed to meet him. I couldn't resist the opportunity to see what kind of play he thought he had left. The next morning, I arrived at a small, upscale restaurant on the edge of the city. The place was quiet, elegant, a perfect place for a secretive conversation. Thomas was already seated at a corner table, his expression unreadable. As soon as I walked in, he stood up and gestured for me to sit. Vanessa, he said, his tone warm, but there was something cold in his eyes. I'm glad you agreed to meet. I think it's time we talk. About what, Thomas? I asked, my voice casual but firm. You've already made it clear where you stand. He sighed, sitting back down, his fingers tapping on the table. I think you've misunderstood everything, Vanessa. This isn't about us versus you. It's about the future of the company. You think you've won, but the truth is, you're playing a dangerous game. The board is not happy with your recent decisions. They feel like you've isolated yourself from the family, and that's not something they're willing to overlook. I raised an eyebrow. You're still trying to intimidate me, Thomas? Still using your family's name as leverage? Because that's not going to work anymore. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. This isn't a game, Vanessa. You can't just walk in and take over. You have to understand there's a legacy here, a legacy that has taken decades to build. And you've come in and tried to tear it all down. I leaned in too, my gaze unwavering. A legacy built on exploitation and manipulation, you mean? A legacy built on me being silenced and pushed aside? That's the legacy you're so proud of. He looked taken aback for a moment, but quickly recovered. You're not seeing the bigger picture. You think you're better than us, that you can just come in and fix everything? But you're not invincible, Vanessa. You're making enemies. You're isolating yourself, and eventually, that will catch up to you. I've made peace with that, I said, my voice steady. If I have to fight every step of the way, then so be it. But I will not back down. You and your family can't keep running this company into the ground. I'm the one who's going to save it. He smiled, though it was a thin, humorless smile. We'll see about that. Just remember, Vanessa, there's always a price to pay for power. I'm already paying it, I replied. And I'll keep paying it because I know it's worth it. The conversation ended there. We parted ways without any more words exchanged, but I could see it in Thomas's eyes. He was rattled. For the first time, he saw me as a genuine threat, and that meant I was doing something right. I spent the rest of the day reviewing the documents I needed to finalize the company's transition. It wasn't just about making the right moves anymore. It was about sending a message. The old guard, the Pierce family, was on its way out, and I was the one who would lead the way. Later that evening, Greg called again. I didn't pick up immediately. The anger, the betrayal, it still lingered, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear whatever he had to say. But then curiosity got the best of me. I picked up the phone. Vanessa, his voice was soft but strained. Can we talk? I took a deep breath. What's there left to say, Greg? I was wrong, he said, his words slow and deliberate. I didn't understand. I didn't see what you were trying to do. I thought I could have it all, my family, the company, you. But I can't. I chose them and I chose wrong. I need you. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words, but I wasn't swayed. You made your choice, Greg, and I've made mine. I can't change what I've done, he said, his voice breaking. But if you'll give me a chance, we can fix this. We can. No, Greg, you don't get it. I interrupted, my voice hard. I'm not the same person you married. I'm not the person you wanted me to be. I'm stronger now. I've built something bigger than both of us, and I won't let anyone take that away." There was a long silence before he spoke again. "Then I guess this is it." I nodded, even though I knew he couldn't see me. "Yes, it is." I hung up, feeling a sense of finality. It was done. I was done. And now there was nothing left to stop me. The Pierce legacy was crumbling, and I was the one who would rise from its ashes.